Have you ever felt like something essential was missing in your life? Like you've been searching for security, peace, or even financial stability, only to end up feeling further from it each time? Has this ever happened to you? You try, you push, you strive, and yet there's this invisible wall. What if I told you that the wall isn't real? That the lack you experience, especially in money, love, or self-worth, is not a reflection of reality, but of a single illusion, the belief that you are separate from the divine source of all good? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely shift the way you see your struggles, and more importantly, your power to overcome them. According to the timeless metaphysical teachings of Emmet Fox, all human need is nothing more than a temporary hypnosis, the belief that we've been cast out, disconnected, exiled from our origin. But here's the truth: we were never separated. The pain doesn't arise from the hardship itself, but from forgetting who we are and where we come from. And in the realm of financial scarcity, this forgetfulness becomes a kind of inner fog, a state of amnesia that dims our perception of abundance, distorting our ability to receive what is already ours. We're taught to chase wealth outside of ourselves, to measure success in possessions or power. But what if abundance isn't something you have to acquire, but something you simply have to remember? This brings us to one of the most powerful allegories ever told, the parable of the prodigal son. You've probably heard it before, but not like this. In this story, the son doesn't lose his inheritance because he's punished or unworthy. No, he loses it because he forgets. He forgets his origin. He wastes not money, but consciousness. He drifts not into sin, but into ignorance. And that, my friend, is what truly costs him everything. But here's the most profound part. The inheritance was never revoked. It was always there, waiting, not in some far-off place, but within. The moment the son remembers who he is and decides to return, the abundance begins to flow again, instantly. The outer world hasn't changed yet. His shoes are still worn, his clothes still tattered, but the inner decision shifts the entire trajectory of his life. Could it be that the same power is within you right now? You see, the real meaning behind the prodigal son isn't about a literal journey back home, but a spiritual return to truth, to the awareness that you are still and have always been a child of the divine, that nothing has been taken from you, that everything you need, peace, provision, clarity, has been present all along, only hidden behind the veil of mental separation. And once that veil begins to lift, everything changes. So take a breath. Let go of the idea that you're alone or lacking, because in the next moments, we're going to begin uncovering not just a teaching, but a path, a map back to your inheritance. And it all starts with one decision: to come home. Let's take the first step together. We're often taught to believe that money problems are just that, money problems. That bills piling up, debts growing, and the constant feeling of not having enough are rooted in external conditions. The job we lost, the opportunities we didn't get, the economy, the timing, the system. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if all of that is just the effect, and not the cause? Here's the hidden truth few ever tell. Debt isn't just numbers on a statement. It's a reflection of belief, a manifestation of how we see ourselves in relation to the source of abundance. When someone says, "I owe too much, I'll never get out of this," they're not just stating a financial fact. They're unconsciously affirming a disconnection from their spiritual identity. They're echoing the deepest fear of the separated mind. I'm on my own. And this belief, subtle, ingrained, often invisible, is precisely what blocks the flow. The mindset of separation keeps you trapped in scarcity, not because you're cursed, unlucky, or not working hard enough, but because you've forgotten that you are already an heir to the infinite, forgotten that abundance is not something you earn, it's something you align with. This is why financial struggle is so often accompanied by shame, because deep down, something in us knows it shouldn't be this way. We weren't born to chase scraps. We were born to overflow. And that's where the miracle begins. Not with more hustle, not with a bigger loan, not with a lottery ticket, but with a simple inner shift, the decision to return. That moment when the prodigal son says to himself, "I will arise and go to my father," isn't just poetic. It's the exact instant when everything changes. Not because his clothes got fixed, or his circumstances suddenly improved, but because his consciousness reconnected to the truth. He remembered who he was. It didn't matter how much he'd lost. It didn't matter how far he'd strayed, or how low he'd sunk. The moment he chose to return, to remember, his inheritance began to flow again. And this is more than symbolism. It's law. Your outer world rearranges itself the moment your inner world wakes up. Think about that. How many times have you told yourself, "Once I fix my finances, I'll feel better"? But what if it works the other way around? What if, once you feel aligned with your source, your finances begin to fix themselves? Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because the core of it isn't really about money. It's about identity. It's about breaking the mental agreement we made with limitation and replacing it with a new agreement, one rooted in truth, in provision, in spiritual authority. So if this message is resonating with something deep inside you, write in the comments, "I'm also on this path." What if the breakthrough you've been chasing doesn't require a new job, a new contact, or even a new opportunity, but a new way of seeing? History leaves us subtle breadcrumbs, and some of the most overlooked lessons come from one of the darkest economic periods the world has ever seen. Between 1930 and 1949, in the shadow of the Great Depression, people who had lost everything, homes, savings, hope, began experiencing unexpected financial restoration, but not through strategy or hustle, through something far more powerful, a shift in consciousness. These weren't tycoons or mystics living in castles. They were everyday men and women, small shop owners, single mothers, out-of-work clerks. They didn't have access to loans, favors, or safety nets. What they did have, however, was a decision to stop wrestling with lack and start working with spirit. One by one, they turned away from the panic and despair of the outside world and chose to treat their minds, not their problems. This wasn't magic, it was law, through the practice of affirmative prayer and a method called the Golden Key, where one turns entirely away from the problem and instead focuses on the presence of God. They began to see change. Not slowly, not incrementally, but sometimes instantly. Letters from creditors turned into offers of forgiveness. Eviction threats dissolved into opportunities. Unexpected checks arrived. Canceled debts. Opened doors. And not because the economy changed, but because they did. And that's the revelation hidden behind the scenes. Your outer life cannot outrun your inner beliefs. The moment these individuals chose to stop feeding the illusion of separation, their reality started to reflect their spiritual truth. They didn't pray to be rescued. They prayed to remember. And in remembering, they aligned with the truth that supply was never outside of them to begin with. Prayer, when used not as a plea, but as a declaration of identity, has the power to transform not just circumstances, but reality itself. But it must come from a certain place. Not fear, not desperation, but recognition. Recognition that your source is intact, that nothing has been lost except the awareness of what was always there. So often, we pray with our eyes on the problem, whispering words of hope while our hearts are still clenched in fear. But the spiritual law is exact. You cannot affirm truth while still honoring the illusion. True prayer is not a negotiation. It's alignment. It's not begging for a solution. It's stepping into the energy of one who already has access, because you do. And when you pray from this knowing, something extraordinary happens. The fatted calf appears, not always as money, sometimes as peace, sometimes as a perfectly timed idea, a reconnection, a sudden offer, a door that should have stayed closed swinging wide open. You realize abundance doesn't always arrive in the shape you imagined, but it always arrives in the form you need. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once you understand how spiritual laws respond to consciousness, you'll begin to see why your mindset, your vision, and your inner alignment matter far more than any external condition you face. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me," and that's the part that often slips past unnoticed. The real transformation doesn't begin when something shows up in your life, But when something wakes up inside you, this teaching isn't about how to budget better or manifest quick wealth. It's not another method to force life into your control. It's about something far more intimate. It's about remembering who you are. There's a sacred truth that's been buried beneath layers of conditioning and fear. You were never meant to live in scarcity. You weren't designed to fight for crumbs or beg for survival. The deeper spiritual reality, the one that's been quietly pulsing beneath your circumstances, is that you're already connected to a source of unlimited provision. Not someday, not if you're good enough, not once you've earned it, but now, already. This isn't a poetic metaphor. It's law. Ephesians doesn't say we will receive an inheritance. It says we had it. Past perfect tense. Already given. Already yours. That changes everything. Because it means you're not chasing something outside yourself. You're uncovering something within. You're not trying to become worthy. You're realizing you always were. When you truly let that truth settle into your spirit, something shifts. You stop negotiating with life. You stop measuring your worth by outcomes. You stop living like a servant in a kingdom where you were always meant to be a son. This isn't about entitlement. It's about identity. The prodigal son didn't receive love because he repented well enough. The father didn't open the door because the boy came home with the right apology. No, the father celebrated because the son remembered he belonged. That was it. That's all it ever takes. One inner movement, one realignment, one return. There's a hidden truth here with massive impact. The Father doesn't ration, measure, or delay. He doesn't hand out provision like a judge behind a desk. He celebrates. He runs to meet you, because nothing was ever lost, only forgotten. The supply, the joy, the inheritance, it never left. The only thing that wandered was your awareness, and that realization alone can change the trajectory of your life. When you stop seeing yourself as someone who needs to earn, prove, or chase, and instead see yourself as someone who has always had access, the world responds differently. Not because the world changed, but because you did. This is the journey beneath the surface. The behind-the-scenes shift that rewrites every decision you make, every relationship you touch, every result you expect. The moment you stop begging for what's already yours and start walking in the energy of someone who belongs, everything around you begins to adjust. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding you have an inheritance is only the beginning. The next step is learning how to live from it. Write in the comments, "I'm reclaiming what's already mine." It's easy to believe that the abundance we seek can slip through our fingers. That one wrong move, one missed opportunity, or one painful chapter has the power to cancel everything we hoped for. But that belief, no matter how convincing it feels, is part of the illusion. Because spiritual wealth, the kind that comes from your divine origin, is not fragile. It doesn't vanish. It can't be revoked, lost, or stolen. It's not tied to the conditions around you. It's tied to the truth within you. This is where the real shift begins. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. You begin to realize that your inheritance is not a future event. It's a present reality waiting for you to claim it with your awareness. You could ignore it for years, live as if it doesn't exist, convince yourself you're disconnected from all support, and yet, it remains. Untouched, permanent. Like the sun behind the clouds, it doesn't stop shining just because you can't see it. And that changes the entire game. Because once you stop seeing prosperity as something to get, and start seeing it as something to align with, your relationship to life changes. You no longer chase outcomes to feel safe. You no longer wait for permission to feel worthy. You begin operating from a new frequency, one that reflects your origin, not your fears. That's why real prosperity has almost nothing to do with how much is in your account. It's about what image is imprinted in your consciousness. Because life, as mysterious as it seems, is always mirroring what you deeply believe to be true about yourself. Not what you say you believe, but what you actually carry in your emotional and mental body. The invisible convictions that shape the visible results. So when someone says, "Why is nothing changing in my life even though I'm trying so hard?" the hidden answer often lies in the image they're holding. If you carry an inner portrait of struggle, lack, or unworthiness, the Universe will reflect that, not to punish you, but because it can only echo what you're projecting. This is why internal alignment matters more than any external condition, because your inner world is the blueprint from which your outer world is built. It's not a cliché, it's energetic law. If you want something different to emerge around you, you have to give it permission to emerge within you first. That's the power of consciousness. It's not just awareness, it's creation. And the moment you update the story you're living by, you shift the direction your life flows. Not because you forced anything, but because you stopped resisting what was already yours. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the image you hold in your mind is either the gateway to abundance or the barrier that keeps it at bay. And learning how to change that image is the next step in the journey. Write in the comments, "I'm shifting the image." Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the shift doesn't truly begin until your mind begins to agree with the truth your soul already knows. And here's where many people get stuck. They repeat affirmations, they visualize, they meditate, yet deep down, they still see themselves as someone standing outside the gate, hoping someone will let them in. That internal posture, quiet, almost invisible, is often what blocks the very thing they're trying to call in. Because it's not enough to say the words if you're still carrying the old identity behind them. You can declare abundance every morning, but if you feel like a beggar, the universe will respond to that. Not the words, but the energy behind them. That's why reprogramming the mind isn't about surface-level repetition. It's about reintroducing yourself to who you truly are. Not a servant hoping for a blessing, but an heir declaring what has already been given. And this changes the entire energy of your relationship with prayer. Most of us have been taught to pray from a place of need, asking, pleading, convincing, but real prayer isn't that. It's not about moving God. It's about moving into alignment with the flow that's already in motion. When you stop begging and start harmonizing with what already exists, prayer becomes something entirely different. It becomes recognition. You begin to feel a quiet certainty, not, "I hope this works," but "I know it's already done." Not, "Will I receive?" but "How can I open more fully to what's already being offered?" There's a hidden truth behind the scenes of every spiritual tradition. The universe is not withholding anything from you. It's streaming, constantly. Love, provision, ideas, healing, guidance, all of it is flowing like light through an open window. The only question is whether you're aligned to receive it. Not whether you're deserving, but whether your self-concept allows it in. If you see yourself as broken, the flow feels blocked. If you see yourself as abandoned, the stream seems distant. But the moment you begin to walk in the truth of your inheritance, the moment your inner posture rises to match your divine origin, things begin to move, subtly at first, quietly, but with growing momentum. And here's the most beautiful part. You don't have to force it. You don't have to demand or manipulate or prove. You simply return, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, to the awareness that you were never separate. You let the old image dissolve, the one that whispered, "You're not enough, you don't belong, you have to fight for scraps," and in its place, you welcome a new image, one of certainty, of belonging, of divine access. That's where the transformation really begins. Not outside, but within. Because the moment you stop seeing yourself as someone trying to reach God, and start seeing yourself as someone already in God, already connected to the source, your prayers shift from questions into affirmations, and everything around you starts to respond to that inner authority. Write in the comments, "I'm stepping into alignment." Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once you begin stepping into alignment, something subtle but incredibly powerful starts to shift in how you experience your day. It's not about changing the world outside first. It's about how you frame it the moment you open your eyes. And one of the most transformative ways to do that is by starting each day with a vision, not of problems or obligations, but of the Father's house. Close your eyes, even now if you can, and imagine it, not a literal place, but a state of absolute harmony. Feel the fullness in the air, the richness that doesn't scream but radiates. Notice how nothing is out of place, how peace is the default energy, how joy isn't rare. It's the atmosphere, that image, that vibration, that internal setting. It's not a fantasy. It's home. And when you mentally return to that space each day, even for a moment, something powerful begins to happen. The noise of the world loses its grip. The illusion of lack, of struggle, of not enough, starts to dissolve. That's not just a calming exercise, it's a spiritual recalibration, because every single day, you're being bombarded with images that try to hypnotize you into limitation. News feeds, bills, conversations, doubts. Without even realizing it, you can begin to believe those images are reality. But they're not. They're projections, reflections of a world that has forgotten its source. When you deliberately choose to visualize the Father's house, you're not escaping reality. You're remembering it. You're replacing the hypnosis with truth. And that truth? It doesn't ask for qualifications. It doesn't check your record or your past. It welcomes you because you belong. This is where the real shift in mindset takes root. Because abundance was never meant to be a reward for good behavior. It was meant to be a natural expression of your identity. You don't receive because you earned it. You receive because you're part of it. You are a child, not an outsider. You inherit by birthright, not by merit. That's the hidden truth behind every spiritual breakthrough. You don't ascend into abundance by climbing some invisible ladder of worthiness. You return to it by remembering who you are. And when that remembering becomes a daily habit, through visualization, prayer, meditation, or even simple stillness, you start to build a new foundation, one that doesn't wobble with circumstances, one that doesn't panic when something unexpected happens, because it's rooted not in evidence, but in essence, and that essence is unshakable. Now, as this inner posture becomes more familiar, you'll begin to notice a different kind of power awakening in your life, not loud or forceful, but quiet, steady, deeply rooted, a sense of calm expectancy, a peace that doesn't need proof, a knowing that what is yours can never be withheld. Write in the comments, "I live from the Father's house." Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because once you begin to truly live from the Father's house, something profound starts to settle inside you. You stop chasing and start remembering. You stop measuring your worth by how much you've accumulated or how much you've achieved, and begin to root yourself in a much more powerful truth. Your inheritance has nothing to do with external conditions. It's not held in a bank, not managed by a system, not controlled by governments or markets. Your real wealth, your true, infinite, untouchable supply, lives in your consciousness. And that awareness, once awakened, becomes your most valuable asset, because when you understand that abundance is spiritual first, everything else starts to reorganize. You no longer panic when things shift. You no longer crumble when life surprises you. Why? Because you're no longer drawing your security from temporary structures. You're drawing it from something permanent, something unshakable, something within. This is the hidden truth that changes everything. Consciousness is the storehouse, not effort, not status, not hustle, but consciousness. When you know who you are, when you hold that truth deeply, not just intellectually, but energetically, it changes the way the world responds to you. Not because you became someone else, but because you remembered who you were all along. That's the essence of spiritual work. It's not about becoming better, or holier, or more enlightened. It's about peeling back the illusion, unlearning what fear taught you, undoing the false images that tried to define you. The journey isn't about adding more. It's about revealing what was always there underneath. That's why prayer and meditation matter. Not because they earn you something, but because they restore you to yourself. You begin to see that every limitation, every delay, every struggle, was never about the universe withholding anything. It was about a part of you forgetting where your inheritance truly lives. And once you return to that inner knowing, there's no need to prove, to push, or to plead. You begin to live from a different center, calmer, clearer, unbothered by the noise. This is where real impact happens, when your decisions are no longer made from survival mode, but from divine memory. When your actions aren't driven by fear, but by alignment. And this isn't theory. It's an entirely different experience of life, one where synchronicities feel normal, where peace becomes your home frequency, where your inner world leads and your outer world follows. Because the truth is, nothing can block what's already yours. No circumstance has more authority than your own awareness of who you are. And every moment you pause, breathe, and reconnect, you strip away one more layer of illusion and take one more step back into the reality of your divine identity. Write in the comments, "My supply lives within me." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because the point where most people quietly veer off course isn't during crisis or confusion, but in their understanding of belief itself. We've been taught to treat faith like a feeling, as if it's something we have to emotionally stir up, something soft and fleeting, tied to how inspired we feel in a given moment. But belief, real belief, isn't emotional. It's a position, a stance of consciousness, a mental posture so grounded that even when nothing around you has changed, you still know. That's what makes faith so powerful. It doesn't rely on the senses. It isn't about goosebumps or signs or even hope. It's the invisible decision to align your entire mindset with truth, regardless of whether you can yet see the fruit of it. It's knowing that spiritual substance exists behind what's visible, and refusing to trade that knowing for temporary doubt. That's the kind of faith that moves reality, because it isn't asking permission from the external. It's issuing a directive from the internal. And that's when the outer world begins to respond. Because your experience is never random, it's always a match to your consciousness. This is the hidden law that governs every outcome, every turn in the journey, every miracle that people describe but don't always understand. What you truly believe, not what you say, but what you carry in the quiet corners of your awareness, is what life will mirror back to you. This is the law of correspondence, and it's not mystical jargon. It's the architecture of existence. As within, so without. Shift your inner world, and you'll notice how your outer world subtly starts to reorganize. People change. Opportunities appear. Old blocks dissolve. Not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because you became clearer. And it all begins with a decision to treat your consciousness as the cause, not the consequence, of your experience. That's the real transformation. The decision to stop reacting to circumstances and instead start responding to truth, to stop trying to fix what's out there and start recalibrating what's in here. Because once you realize you're not here to be at the mercy of appearances, but to express a reality that begins in spirit, you reclaim something essential: creative authority. You stop waiting and start becoming. Not through force, but through alignment, through choosing the image you hold, the attitude you adopt, the truth you refuse to betray, no matter how things look for a moment. And when that conviction takes root, when belief stops being a concept and becomes a lens, you'll notice something subtle but profound: peace. Not because you've figured it all out, but because you've remembered who's really writing the script. And it was never fear. Write in the comments, "My belief shapes my world." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this is the part where the internal becomes visible, where the unseen crosses the threshold into form, and it all hinges on something most people overlook: mental equivalence. You can't manifest abundance while holding a mental image of lack. You can't expect expansion if your inner world is still shrinking. Life responds to what you believe you are, not what you wish for. That's the quiet mechanism always working behind the scenes. So when someone says, "I've been praying for change, I've been asking for more," the deeper question is, what image are you holding while you ask? Is it an image of someone struggling to get by, someone on the outside looking in? Or is it an image of someone who already is abundant, supported, and deeply connected to divine provision? Because the law doesn't respond to the words, it responds to the state behind them. This is where your practice becomes powerful. Not because of the ritual itself, but because of the identity you're rehearsing. Every morning you take a moment to affirm your spiritual inheritance. You're not just saying nice things. You're rewriting your inner script. You're setting a new pattern in motion, one that says, "This is who I am. This is the reality I align with." And the law, without fail, meets that alignment. It's not magic. It's clarity. It's structure. The universe operates with precision, and your consciousness is the blueprint. So when you hold the mental equivalence of abundance, life has no choice but to reflect it. But here's where most people trip up. They start this process with anxiety, with pressure, with the mindset that says, if I don't do this right, it won't work. But this isn't about performance. It's about resonance. The key is to approach it with calm assurance, not urgency. You're not trying to make something happen. You're allowing what's already true to emerge. Try this. For the next 21 days, begin your mornings with a simple visualization. See your life not as it is, but as it truly is in spirit, whole, provided for, rich with divine substance. Feel it. Let that version of you become familiar. Walk through your day as if that image is already reality, because spiritually, it is. And as you do this consistently, not with force but with quiet faith, you'll begin to notice something extraordinary. The outer world bends to match the inner one, not overnight, not always dramatically, but steadily, accurately, in ways you didn't see coming. This is the impact of mental equivalence. It shapes what's possible, and then makes it probable. Write in the comments, I'm creating the inner image. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this is where the illusion begins to crack. So many people think they're battling poverty, failure, or missed opportunities, when in truth they're only battling one thing, a hypnotic idea they unknowingly accepted. Poverty is not a circumstance, it's a trance, a mental fog that convinces you you're far from home, disconnected, lacking, unworthy. That's the real distant country from the parable. Not a physical place, but a mindset, a distorted lens through which you begin to interpret everything as not enough time, not enough love, not enough money, not enough self-worth. And it's convincing. It really is, because once you start living under that spell, the world mirrors it back to you. You begin seeing limitation where there's actually potential. You feel blocked even when doors are quietly opening. You interpret delay as denial. But the truth? You haven't lost your inheritance. You've simply forgotten where it resides. It's like walking around with a treasure map sewn into your own jacket and never thinking to check the lining. This is where your awareness becomes the key. Because the most dangerous thing about mental hypnosis isn't just what it hides from you, it's what it wastes. Your energy, your attention, your creative force. And every time you entertain thoughts of resentment, self-pity, doubt, or comparison, you're spending that inner currency on illusions. You're investing in shadows. These thoughts don't bring returns. They drain you. They look like real feelings. They feel like justified reactions, but they hold no creative power. They only multiply more of themselves. And once you see that clearly, you stop negotiating with them. You stop explaining your pain to them. You stop letting them narrate your future. Instead, you choose truth, even if it feels unfamiliar at first. You begin affirming what's real, not what's reflexive. You start catching those thoughts as they rise and asking, is this the voice of the heir or of the beggar? And with time, the voice of truth grows. Stronger, not louder, but steadier. And that steadiness is everything. It becomes your compass, your stability, your foundation when the outside world tries to pull you back into fear. Because that's what this journey really is. It's not about fixing what's broken, but waking up from what was never true to begin with. It's about reclaiming the energy you've been pouring into doubt and reinvesting it into remembrance, into the clarity of who you've always been beneath the noise. And once that shift begins even subtly, your path changes, quietly, powerfully, permanently. Put down in the comments, I've left the distant country. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because sometimes what looks like a historical event is actually just a mirror reflecting a collective state of mind. Take the 1929 stock market crash, for example. On the surface, it was a financial disaster, but beneath the surface it was something far more revealing, a mass forgetting, a shared hypnosis. The illusion of prosperity that had no spiritual roots finally collapsed under its own weight. What we saw wasn't just numbers falling, it was consciousness crumbling. The crash didn't come out of nowhere. It followed a period where trust in divine order had been replaced by blind faith in systems speculation, and surface appearances. When connection to source is lost, fear rushes in to fill the gap. People begin chasing illusions of wealth, mistaking accumulation for abundance, mistaking movement for direction. And when that scaffolding collapses, as it always does when it's built on ego, the fallout looks like panic, scarcity, chaos. But those are just symptoms. The real cause is disconnection, a spiritual short circuit. It's tempting to think that events like that belong to the past, but the truth is, they play out every day inside individual minds. That same illusion, the belief that wealth can exist independently of spiritual consciousness, is still active, and the result is always the same, temporary gain, followed by deeper confusion. Because without anchoring your sense of supply in something permanent, everything feels fragile, easily lost, threatened by time, by competition, by external change. But here's the hidden truth. Poverty doesn't begin in the world. It begins in the mind. Not because you aren't working hard enough or thinking positively enough, but because somewhere, subtly, you've agreed with a lie. The lie that you're separate, that supply is scarce, that some have it and others don't, that you must fight for your share. This idea is so widespread it feels like common sense, but it's not truth, it's suggestion. And like any suggestion, it only becomes real when you accept it. That's how illusions work. They need your agreement to take form. But once you see them for what they are, the power they held dissolves. You stop reacting to shadows. You begin reclaiming your energy and pointing it towards something real, something rooted in spiritual identity. Because there is no lack in God. None. And if you're connected to that source, lack becomes impossible. That doesn't mean you'll never face challenges, but it does mean those challenges won't define your state of being. You'll navigate them from a place of trust, of wholeness, of unshakable knowing. And that shift in posture? That's where your true security comes from. Write in the comments, I choose divine foundation over fear. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this is where the real shift begins to take form, not just intellectually, but energetically. If you've ever felt trapped in a cycle where reality seems to contradict your inner knowing, where the outside world keeps screaming lack, while something quieter inside whispers abundance, you're not imagining the conflict. That tension is the precise battleground of transformation. It's the moment when you're called to choose which voice you'll align with, the echo of appearances or the resonance of truth. This is where mental hygiene becomes essential, not in the superficial sense of just thinking positively, but in the deeper spiritual discipline of denying error its authority, not denying that appearances exist, but denying their power to define you. Lack may show up in your bank account, your circumstances, your current results, but that doesn't mean you are lacking. There's a massive difference between observing a condition and internalizing it as identity, and unless you consciously refuse to accept illusion as truth, it will quietly plant itself in your mindset and bloom as limitation. Denying error isn't avoidance, it's sovereignty. It's standing in front of fear and saying, I see you, but I do not bow to you. You're not pretending challenges don't exist. You're simply choosing not to let them override your divine inheritance. That's spiritual clarity, and it takes repetition. It takes the decision to declare truth even when nothing around you affirms it. That's where affirmative prayer enters, not as a request to some distant deity, but as a bold, quiet declaration of what already is. You speak it not to make it happen, but to remember that it already has, even when appearances mock it, even when doubt tries to negotiate with it, even when logic tries to interrupt. And that's the real miracle. Not that your words change the world instantly, but that they change your posture toward it. They recalibrate your focus. They restore internal order. The moment you speak from truth, even in a whisper, the grip of fear begins to loosen. Your inner world becomes still, and in that stillness, clarity returns. Not because you escaped reality, but because you finally remembered which reality holds weight. It's a subtle rebellion, a quiet, persistent return to alignment. And every time you do it, every time you choose to declare what's true over what's loud, you reclaim a part of yourself that was caught in illusion. Write in the comments, truth is my anchor. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because there's a subtle thread here that often goes unnoticed. Fear. It slips in like a whisper but moves through us like a storm. And the strange thing is, fear doesn't even need to be true to feel real. It just needs to be rehearsed, repeated, fed by imagination. That's its trick. It disguises itself as foresight, as logic, as protection, when in reality, it's often nothing more than a projection, a shadow on the wall cast by a candle of uncertainty. But here's what breaks that illusion: awareness. Fear has no substance when you bring it into the light of truth, and one of the most powerful truths you can declare in the middle of fear is simply this: God is here. There is no fear. That isn't poetic. It's a spiritual tool, a reset, a line drawn in consciousness. Because when you affirm the presence of God, you're not just offering yourself comfort, you're interrupting the cycle of fear that's been running on autopilot. You're pulling yourself out of the trance. Because fear, at its core, is hypnotic. It narrows your vision. It makes you forget what you know. But truth expands your awareness again. It's like turning on a light in a room you thought was dangerous, only to see there was nothing there all along. That's why it matters how you think and how you live, not just spiritually, but practically. Each thought you choose, each narrative you entertain, is like taking a step either back toward your spiritual home or further into that distant land of separation. It's a journey of return, not in distance, but in awareness. And that return begins with simple decisions. You notice the old story rising up. It's not going to work out. I'm not enough. There's no way through. And instead of following it, you replace it. You affirm what's deeper than fear, louder than doubt, more permanent than circumstance. You say things like, I am supported. I walk with divine guidance. Nothing real can be threatened. And even if, at first it feels like just words, keep going. Because those words are seeds. And when planted in repetition and watered with intention, they grow. They shift your energy. They recalibrate your focus. They remind your nervous system that you are not alone, that you never were. What you think, over time, becomes how you live, and how you live reinforces how you think. So shift one, and the other follows. This isn't about pretending problems don't exist. It's about refusing to let fear make decisions for you. Because when fear is in the driver's seat, you're not going anywhere new. You're just circling the same territory of doubt and survival. But when truth leads, everything changes. Put down in the comments, I walk with truth, not fear. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic because how you begin your day quietly sets the tone for everything that follows. Before your feet touch the ground, before your mind starts rehearsing yesterday's worries, before the news or the notifications flood your attention, there's a sacred moment, a blank canvas, and what you place on that canvas shapes the way life responds. That's why starting with truth isn't just a feel-good ritual, it's a realignment, a conscious declaration that you're not going to let fear, lack, or limitation set the agenda for your day. When you wake up and declare, today, I remember who I am. All I need is given. Something begins to shift. Not out there, but in here. It's subtle but powerful, like tuning into a different radio frequency, one that doesn't play the noise of self-doubt, scarcity, or unworthiness. Instead, it plays a deeper melody, one that reminds you, you were never meant to beg for crumbs when you've been given the whole table. But to receive what's yours, you first have to claim what's yours. And that's where many people unknowingly limit themselves. Not because they're not spiritual enough or disciplined enough, but because somewhere along the line, they started believing they weren't worthy enough. This is the hidden truth behind so much quiet suffering. It's not the lack of resources. It's the internal decision to accept a fraction of what's actually available, to stay small, to play safe, to avoid disappointment by not hoping too much. But the irony is that this very mindset creates the limitation it fears. It keeps the door closed, not because it's locked, but because we forgot we had the key all along. Self-limitation is more than just low confidence. It's a spiritual forgetfulness. It's the moment the prodigal son finds himself feeding pigs, not because the father cast him out, but because he believed he had to settle for less. And that's the moment many of us wake up to. When we realize we've been living in a world smaller than the one we were born to inherit, not because the world withheld it, but because we didn't recognize our right to receive it. This mindset is not just about prosperity, it's about identity. Every time you accept crumbs, not just financially but emotionally, spiritually, or relationally, you reinforce a false story about who you are. And the longer that story runs, the more real it begins to feel. But just because something feels real doesn't make it true. The shift happens the moment you stop asking the world for validation and start remembering that your worth was never up for debate. The path home isn't built on effort, it's built on remembrance. You already belong. You're already worthy. And every time you begin your day with that truth, you're not just creating a better morning, you're rewriting the entire pattern of your life. Put down in the comments, "I begin my day with truth." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this is where the real shift begins. Not in waiting for a miracle to drop from the sky, but in recognizing that the miracle is already inside what you've been overlooking. It's the story of the widow's oil. She believed she had nothing left, just a little oil in a jar. Hardly enough to survive, much less thrive. But that's the turning point. Not when the oil multiplied, but when she stopped seeing it as nothing. Because the moment you bless what you have, even if it looks small, even if it feels insignificant, you're no longer aligning with lack. You're activating the principle of divine increase. So many people are trapped not by what they lack, but by what they dismiss. They overlook their gifts, their voice, their ideas, their experience, because they've been hypnotized by comparison, convinced that real worth only comes when it's wrapped in grandeur. But the truth is hidden in plain sight. Abundance always starts with what's in your hand. And the second you stop cursing it, stop downplaying it, stop telling yourself it's not enough, you open the gates. This is the hidden law behind transformation. Motion invites multiplication. If you want the oil to flow, you have to pour. You can't wait to feel ready, certain, or validated by the world. You take what you have, your time, your skill, your energy, your little jar of oil, and you start. That's where faith becomes real. Not in a church pew or on a vision board, but in action. You move, and the law moves with you. This is why people who bless their small beginnings often witness sudden, exponential breakthroughs. Not because the universe favors them, but because they aligned with the truth that provision always matches obedience. You use what you've got, and what you've got grows. That's not magic. That's spiritual law. It's not about begging for more. It's about stewarding what already is. And that shift in mindset creates a new flow, one that was waiting all along, just behind your old perception. Behind the scenes of every success story is this hidden decision. Someone chose to bless their oil instead of curse their lack. They chose to see potential where others saw limitation. And that single decision rewrote their outcome. This isn't just about finances. It's about life, about seeing your path, your worth, your voice, as sacred ground. Because the oil didn't flow when she was waiting. It flowed when she began pouring. Write in the comments, "I choose to bless my oil." Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because here lies one of the most misunderstood keys to divine abundance, the way we perceive ourselves, not just spiritually, but practically. There's a hidden truth many overlook: your gifts, your talents, your creative sparks. The very things you've been putting off or doubting are actually doorways, not just symbolic ones, but real, powerful channels through which spiritual provision flows. And the moment you stop minimizing what you can do and start honoring it as sacred, you begin to dismantle the illusion of limitation. Too many people are waiting for abundance to show up in some dramatic external way, while the universe is whispering, "Use what's already in you." That skill you abandoned years ago because someone laughed at it. That idea you shelved because it didn't look perfect. That dream you've tucked away in a quiet corner of your soul. All of it still lives inside you, not to tease you, but to remind you. There's a spiritual economy, and in it, nothing is wasted. Everything you've experienced, every lesson learned, every talent, even the ones you haven't used in years, can be transformed into supply when you bring them into the light and declare, "This too is part of my abundance." And then there's the weight we often carry, silently, the guilt, the regret, the self-punishment over past financial decisions. This is the deeper block that rarely gets spoken of. You can visualize prosperity, affirm wealth, write down every goal, and still stay stuck if deep down you believe you don't deserve it. Because guilt and shame are like invisible chains, and forgiveness, real forgiveness, is what breaks them. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. Bless your mistakes. Yes, bless them. Look back at that missed opportunity, that poor investment, that season of scarcity, and instead of cursing it, see it for what it really was: a teacher, a necessary curve on your journey of becoming. The moment you stop letting your past define your worth, your energy shifts. The door opens. Supply moves. Why? Because shame is a signal of separation. And prosperity doesn't flow to someone trying to earn their worth. It flows to someone who remembers they're already worthy. That's the real transformation. When you stop identifying as the person who messed up and start reclaiming your role as a co-creator with divine intelligence, everything begins to respond differently. Ideas find you, opportunities warm up around you, doors you didn't even knock on begin to open. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Put down, "I release the shame and bless the gift." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the way you relate to the past, and to the people around you, has more power over your current abundance than you've ever been taught. It's not just about what you do now, but how you perceive what was, and how you respond to what is, especially when what you see is someone else winning while you feel like you're standing still. But this is where the real shift happens. When you begin to treat your memories and your emotions as tools for spiritual alchemy, everything starts to change. Think of your past financial setbacks not as anchors, but as sacred ground. Those moments of loss, those failed ventures, those desperate choices, they aren't stains on your record. They're coded messages. Each one brought you a lesson you needed, even if it came dressed in fear or frustration. Practicing what Emmet Fox calls retroactive blessing isn't just about being positive, it's about reclaiming power. You go back in your mind, look at the version of you that made that decision, and instead of judging or shaming them, you bless them. You say, "You were doing your best with what you knew, and that mistake brought me wisdom I carry today." That mindset unlocks energy that's been frozen in guilt. It releases stored resistance. And the more you bless the past, the more you free the present. And then there's that uncomfortable feeling that creeps in when you see others thriving. You scroll through your feed, see someone else celebrating their promotion, their abundance, their breakthrough, and something tightens inside. Envy, comparison, doubt. That voice whispers, "Why not me?" But here's the transformation. When you learn to celebrate another's success as evidence of what's possible, everything shifts. Their prosperity no longer becomes a reminder of your lack, but a divine confirmation that supply is flowing, that you're on a path where miracles are already happening. The truth is, the universe doesn't operate on competition. It works through alignment. When you rejoice in someone else's overflow, you signal that you're ready to receive your own. Because envy speaks lack. But celebration speaks faith. And faith is the currency of spiritual manifestation. When you declare from your heart, "Their success is a preview of mine," you open yourself to the same frequency. Put down, "I celebrate proof that mine is on the way." Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because there's a silent pattern that often hides behind our most persistent blocks, and it's the mindset of the elder brother. You remember him, right? From the story of the prodigal son. He didn't waste his inheritance. He stayed, obeyed, did everything right. But when his younger brother returned and was embraced with joy and gifts, the elder brother couldn't celebrate, not because he lacked blessings, but because comparison blinded him to what he already had. This mentality is subtle. It shows up when you think, "I've done everything. I've been good. Why is nothing happening for me?" That internal protest is not just frustration. It's a signal that your heart has shifted from gratitude to entitlement. And here's the hidden truth. Entitlement contracts you're receiving. Gratitude expands it. You were never meant to receive in competition with others. You were meant to receive in cooperation with the divine flow. When you compare timelines, miracles, or manifestations, you step out of alignment and into resistance. And that resistance doesn't punish you. It simply closes the channel. It's like trying to fill a cup with the lid still on. But the moment you shift and say, if it's happening for them, it can happen for me, something unlocks. You begin to live from faith, not fear, from inspiration, not resentment. That's when the universe responds, not to your demands, but to your willingness to believe again. And one of the most powerful ways to rewire this belief system is through what Emmet Fox called the imaginary check. You don't need a physical deposit to start feeling like someone who receives. You need a decision, a clear inner signature that says, I accept this. Visualize the amount. Don't make it vague. Feel it. See it. Imagine it deposited in your account. Walk with the inner knowing that supply has arrived. This isn't wishful thinking. It's a declaration. It's you stepping into the role of heir instead of outsider. The check may be imaginary, but the shift it causes in your nervous system, your actions, your energy, that's very real. And it's that shift that moves mountains. Put down in the comments, I've signed it in my spirit. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because this final stretch isn't just about receiving more, it's about becoming someone new. It's about stepping into a version of yourself that no longer operates from scarcity or survival, but from inner authority. And that begins with something most people overlook, the mental tithe, not the physical action of giving money, though that may follow naturally, but the energetic discipline of dedicating a portion of every increase, every gain, every bit of income to the source itself. It's an acknowledgement that what came to you didn't come from you, it came through you. And when you do this in thought, something sacred happens behind the scenes. You remove yourself from the illusion of ownership and place yourself under the law of divine circulation. When you mentally tithe, you aren't just practicing gratitude. You are creating an imprint. You're impressing upon your consciousness that expansion is normal, that increase is safe, and that your provision is never cut off. You stop clutching and start flowing. And it's this exact mindset that unlocks the next dimension of abundance, the kind that is unshakable even when appearances seem tight. You begin to trust that what leaves returns multiplied, not by the logic of the world, but by the invisible rhythm of divine law. And that trust, that's where true wealth begins. But here's the revelation that turns the key. The greatest chains are not the external debts you owe. They are the mental images you replay. The constant reminder of the numbers, the anxiety of what's still left to pay. That emotional repetition becomes a form of prayer, and it keeps debt alive. Emmet Fox teaches that canceling a debt starts with canceling the image of the debt. That's where freedom begins, not in the bank, but in the mind. You start speaking from the place you want to live in. You wake up and say, my debt is canceled, I am free. And you say it not to convince the universe, but to reprogram the belief that lack still has power over you. You do this daily. You do it with faith, not with tension or pressure, but with that quiet inner authority that knows the law is always working, that every declaration made in alignment is a seed planted in spiritual soil. And like all seeds, it doesn't need to be forced, it needs to be trusted. Write in the comments, I choose to live from freedom. If you've stayed with me all the way through, it's because something here resonated, something deeper than words, something your spirit already knew. So if this journey made sense to you, go ahead and tap the like button. It helps more than you think, and it lets me know this message truly landed. And if you felt that quiet yes inside as we moved through each idea, leave a comment saying, this message was meant for me. I'd love to see who's walking this path with me. And of course, if this kind of content feels like nourishment for your mindset, your heart, and your spiritual transformation, you're more, then welcome to subscribe and keep growing with us. There's a video right here that complements everything we just explored. Click and continue with me over there.